At our final court hearing, my wife's lawyer chuckled, "Enjoy your new life. You'll be walking away with nothing." My wife smirked and added, "Maybe you should have tried being a better husband." Then the judge looked at me and asked, "Any final words?" I smiled and said, "Actually, Your Honor, I'd like to submit this." The moment the judge read the document, my wife's face drained of all color. Before we go further, don't forget to like this story, hit subscribe, and tap the bell so you don't miss what happens next. Cold. My 38th birthday was supposed to be low-key. I had a work call in the morning, planned to grab sushi with a few friends later, and maybe just relax at home after a long few weeks. No expectations, no drama. But instead, I got served divorce papers by my wife, Jenna. She walked in, all dolled up like she was heading to a red carpet, not ending our marriage. Tight dress, red lipstick, the works. I was sitting at the kitchen counter, sipping my coffee, still in gym shorts and a hoodie. "Happy birthday," she said, setting a manila envelope in front of me like it was a birthday card. I blinked. "What's this?" Her tone? Cold. Detached. "Read it." Inside. Divorce papers. Served. Filed. All prepped by her attorney. And get this. She hadn't even told me she was unhappy. Not seriously. Not in a way that made me think this was coming. Sure, we'd had rough patches. Who doesn't? But I thought we were working through it. Apparently not. I stared at the paper. "No discussion?" I asked. "No therapy? No heads up?" She didn't even flinch. "You were boring, Nate. Predictable. You stopped trying years ago." The kicker? She said this like it was some profound revelation. Like I should have seen it coming. But I hadn't. Because I was busy working 2 jobs while she sat around pretending to launch an online boutique that, as far as I knew, never sold a single thing. She leaned on the counter and said, "Don't worry, I'm not asking for everything." I laughed bitterly. "Just most of it, right?" She didn't deny it. Over the next few weeks, things got even worse. Her lawyer, Marcus Bell, was one of those guys who wore $5,000 suits and smiled like a cartoon villain. From day one, he treated me like garbage. "Settle early," he said during one of our early sessions. "You'll save yourself a lot of embarrassment." My lawyer, Rachel Quinn, was smart, sharp, and no nonsense, thank God. But even she admitted things looked stacked. Jenna was playing dirty. She had already moved money out of our joint account. She claimed I'd neglected her emotionally, exaggerated my work absences, and even implied that I controlled her spending. The same woman who once blew $8,000 in a single weekend on a wellness retreat in Sedona. And now she was painting herself as the victim? But the real gut punch came when I found out who she left me for. His name? Damon Pierce. A tech investor with a sketchy background and an ego that could fill a football stadium. I recognized him from one of Jenna's networking brunches a year prior. Back then, he was just a friend who gave branding advice. Now, he was sleeping in my house, driving my car, flirting with my coworkers online like I didn't exist. And the worst part? He knew what he was doing. I saw it in his smirk the one time we crossed paths. It wasn't just that he won her, it was that he wanted me to know he'd taken everything. Still, I kept my cool, because I knew something they didn't. I had help. A friend of mine from college, Tyler, now working in legal finance, called me after seeing Jenna post pictures from Paris with Damon. He told me to start documenting everything. Texts, bank withdrawals, odd purchases. I started digging. And what I found wasn't just shady. It was illegal. But I'll get to that. Because the real turning point, the moment I knew I had them, was at the final court hearing. Jenna walked in with that same smug grin. Her lawyer laughed as he passed me, whispering, "Enjoy your new life. You'll be leaving with nothing." Even the judge looked like he had already made up his mind. Then he turned to me and asked, "Mr. Reed, do you have any final statements before the ruling?" And that's when I smiled and said, "Actually, yes. I'd like to submit this as evidence." What I handed him blew the whole case wide open. But I'll save that for chapter 2. When I handed that folder to the judge, I watched Jenna's smirk twitch. She tried to play it cool, but her lawyer, Marcus Bell, immediately leaned in like he smelled smoke. You could feel the tension shift. The courtroom, which moments earlier felt like her victory parade, suddenly got quiet. The judge adjusted his glasses and opened the folder. Inside, bank statements, emails, screenshots, Transaction logs. Every single one, time-stamped, organized, and pointing to one thing. Jenna and Damon had been funneling money out of our accounts long before she filed for divorce. Let me rewind. A few weeks before the hearing, my buddy Tyler, the legal finance guy, reached out again. He said, "You trust your wife?" I didn't answer. He already knew the answer. Tyler had a friend in fintech who owed him a favor. We traced transactions from our joint savings account to a series of shell companies. Names I didn't recognize until we cross-referenced ownership filings. Guess who signed one of the LLCs? Damon Pierce. Another one? A P.O. box registered to Jenna's cousin in Miami, who hadn't filed taxes in 3 years. That was just the beginning. Eli, a programmer friend of mine who once helped me build a CRM at work, got involved next. He helped me decrypt Jenna's cloud storage. Nothing illegal, just a deep dive into shared drives she forgot were synced on our family computer. What we found? Copies of private agreements between Jenna and Damon, laying out how they'd split assets once the divorce was finalized. An email from Jenna's personal Gmail account titled, "How to Move Funds Without Triggering Legal Review," even a draft message where she practiced lying about my supposed emotional neglect. Oh, and the best one? An invoice from a private investigator, hired 6 months ago, to tail me. I guess she hoped I'd cheat first so she could use it in court. Except I hadn't. Not even close. The judge flipped through the pages slowly, eyebrows knitting tighter with every turn. Then he looked up. "Mr. Reed," he said, "these financial documents, have they been verified?" "Yes, Your Honor. I've submitted a sworn affidavit, and the forensic accounting was reviewed by a licensed expert." I handed over Tyler's credentials. Jenna's lawyer stood up. "Objection. This was not submitted during discovery. I received this evidence less than 48 hours ago," I replied calmly. "And per procedural rules, newly uncovered material that could indicate fraud or concealment is admissible." The judge nodded slowly. "Objection overruled. We'll pause for review." You should have seen Jenna's face. Gone was the smug confidence. Her lips were tight, color drained from her cheeks. She whispered something to Marcus, who was already scrolling through his tablet, probably trying to figure out how to clean up this mess. He couldn't, because the deeper they looked, the worse it got. $74,000 unaccounted for. Purchases made in Damon's name with our joint credit line. A vacation in Ibiza 2 months ago, during which Jenna claimed she was staying with her sick aunt. All of it? On record. By the end of the recess, Marcus looked like he'd aged 10 years. He requested a private conference with the judge, but it was too late. The damage was done. My lawyer Rachel leaned in and whispered, "You just flipped this case upside down." I didn't reply. I just watched Jenna stare at her hands like they'd betrayed her. For the first time in months, I felt calm. Not smug. Not spiteful. Just calm. Like I could finally breathe again. Back in session, the judge cleared his throat and spoke slowly. "Given this newly submitted evidence, we are halting the final ruling and ordering a formal audit of all shared financial assets, communications, and third-party transfers. Mrs. Reed, you are hereby ordered to cooperate fully with this investigation. Failure to comply will result in immediate legal action and potential charges." Rachel leaned over and whispered, "This just became a criminal case." Jenna didn't even look at me as we walked out of the courtroom. And for once, I didn't care. Because the truth was finally louder than her lies. After that court hearing, everything shifted. Rachel told me we were entering new legal territory, not just divorce anymore, but fraud investigation. That meant Jenna's assets could be frozen. Damon could be subpoenaed. And anything they tried to bury could now become evidence. And I wasn't wasting a second. Because something about Damon Pierce had always felt off. He'd shown up in Jenna's world like he belonged there. Tech investor. Serial entrepreneur. Mentor to female founders, she'd said with stars in her eyes. Yeah, okay. But when I started looking with Eli's help again, none of Damon's companies actually existed. Oh sure, there were logos. Websites. Instagram pages full of buzzwords like blockchain, disrupt, and sustainable venture capital. But the domains were registered under shell names. The offices were mailboxes and co-working spaces. The social proof? Bought bots and paid influencers. And the kicker? His most successful startup had been sued 3 years ago for misleading investors, and Jenna's name appeared on one of the internal memos. That memo? Dated 5 months before we got married. Yeah, let that sink in. While I was planning a wedding, she was emailing a man who'd later help her siphon money out of our accounts. This wasn't a rebound. This was a long con. I took what we found to Rachel. She looked through the documents, then looked up at me with an expression I'll never forget. Nate, they were planning this for years. What do you mean? She tapped the screen. Look at the timeline. First shell company opened 18 months ago. First withdrawal? 14 months ago. The fake consulting agreement between Jenna and that Florida cousin? 13 months ago. But she only filed for divorce 6 months ago, I said. Exactly. This wasn't about love lost. This was about setup, positioning, asset extraction. It was never a marriage to her. It was an exit strategy. That night, I couldn't sleep. So I did something reckless. I drove by Damon's condo, the one Jenna had moved into after filing. I wasn't planning to confront them. I just wanted to see. Instead, I saw Damon slipping out of the underground garage with a duffel bag and a briefcase. He looked over his shoulder 3 times before getting into a black Mercedes and speeding off like someone was chasing him. It wasn't proof, but my gut screamed. He's running. The next morning, I got a call from Tyler. You're not going to like this, he said. What now? One of Damon's accounts just dumped $190,000 into a crypto wallet routed through Romania. It's untraceable past that point. I felt my stomach drop. Jenna hadn't just been planning a clean break. They were trying to vanish. That's when I got the idea to contact Naomi Chong, a woman I remembered seeing tagged in a photo with Jenna 2 years ago. She was a quiet, reserved type. Worked in accounting. Seemed harmless. I found her LinkedIn. Messaged her directly. Hi, Naomi. You don't know me well, but I believe you may have information about Damon Pierce and Jenna's past business dealings. If you're willing to talk, I can protect your anonymity. She responded in 5 minutes. You have no idea what they've done. I've been waiting for someone to ask. Naomi wasn't just a bystander. She was a whistleblower. She'd worked with Damon on a fake e-commerce venture, a sustainable coffee brand that sold beans sourced from organic micro-farms. Problem was, none of the farms existed. They just shipped cheap bulk beans from overseas and slapped artisan labels on them. And guess who did the branding? Jenna. Emails. Contracts. Pay stubs. Naomi had them all. She sent over a folder titled Project Orchid Full Timeline. The very first file? A business plan Jenna wrote titled, Leveraging Emotional Assets for Strategic Separation. I swear I stopped breathing for a second. Emotional assets? That was me. I was the plan. The next hearing wasn't for another week, but Rachel wasted no time. She filed motions, shared Naomi's statement, and flagged Damon for financial interference and identity fraud. By the time the media caught wind of it, Jenna and Damon weren't couple goals anymore. They were being investigated by 3 separate banks, a fraud division at the FTC, and, thanks to Naomi's evidence, an IRS investigator who personally called to ask me questions. What started as a birthday surprise from hell had turned into a full-blown federal case. And Jenna? She finally stopped smiling. You could cut the air in the courtroom with a knife. The buzz around the case had built like a thunderstorm. It wasn't just a divorce hearing anymore. It was a public reckoning. Reporters sat 2 rows back. Jenna's friends didn't show this time. And Damon? Gone. He'd completely ghosted. No forwarding address, no online presence, not even an attorney on record anymore. It was like he disappeared off the face of the earth. But Jenna? She showed up. Hair in a tight bun, dressed like she was going to a funeral. Her lawyer, Marcus Bell, looked like he hadn't slept in days. The judge entered. Same one from before. Only this time, his expression wasn't neutral. It was focused. Court is now in session, he said. We are proceeding with the evidentiary review of assets, intent, and fraud as it pertains to the dissolution of marriage between Nathan Reed and Jenna Reed. He paused and looked directly at Jenna. Mrs. Reed, you are under oath. Your answers must be truthful and complete. Do you understand? Jenna didn't flinch. Yes, Your Honor. The judge turned to Rachel. Counselor, you may proceed. And that's when the fireworks began. Rachel started slow, methodical. She walked through the original joint accounts, then pivoted to the shell companies. She presented timelines, bank transfers, the fake consulting agreements. Jenna tried to act unfazed, but her eyes kept darting toward the door, like she was still hoping Damon would walk in and save her. But he wouldn't. He was gone. And now she was alone. Rachel introduced Naomi Chang's statement next. Detailed, precise, ruthless. According to Ms. Chang, Rachel said, Mrs. Reed participated in a scheme to defraud customers and investors, and used the profits to begin separating marital assets months prior to the official divorce proceedings. Marcus Bell objected, claimed it was hearsay, but Rachel smiled and replied, Then let's go to the emails. She pulled up the one we'd all read a dozen times by now. From Jenna to Damon. Subject line, Emotional Assets Timeline. Nate inside, Jenna had written, By the time he figures it out, he'll be too embarrassed to fight back. Just keep him focused on working, and I'll handle the money. We'll be in Santorini while he's begging for 50/50ths. The room went dead silent. Jenna went white, and that's when the judge leaned forward and said, Mrs. Reed, explain this email. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Belle whispered to her. She whispered back. The judge cleared his throat. I'll ask again, under oath. Explain your intent with this message. Jenna stammered. It was a joke. Rachel didn't even blink. Would you also consider the $74,000 in unauthorized transfers, the private investigator invoices, and the fabricated financial documents a joke, as well? Jenna looked at the judge. I was under pressure. Damon said it was temporary. I didn't think, and just like that, the mask cracked. The judge sighed and looked down at the file in front of him. I've seen many contentious divorces in this courtroom, he said, but rarely have I seen such a deliberate effort to manipulate, deceive, and financially incapacitate a partner while maintaining the pretense of marriage. He tapped his pen on the bench. I am ordering the immediate freeze of all Mrs. Reed's personal and shared accounts pending full audit. Furthermore, given the evidence of intent to defraud, I am referring this case to the district attorney's office for potential criminal prosecution. Rachel leaned over to me, whispered, She's done. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I believed it. When we walked out of the courtroom, Jenna didn't look at me. She sat there, slumped, her entire empire of lies collapsing in real time. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel smug. I felt free, like I'd finally closed the door on the version of myself that tolerated too much, doubted too often, and believed in people who never deserved it. 3 weeks passed after the courtroom bombshell. Jenna's face had vanished from social media. The influencer posts, the self-care captions, the posed photos in designer bags, all gone. Replaced with silence. And subpoenas. Rachel kept me in the loop. Jenna was now being investigated for financial fraud, wire transfers through dummy corporations, and possible tax evasion. Her accounts were frozen. Her legal team cut ties. And get this, her own cousin flipped, saying Jenna pressured her to sign phony paperwork without understanding what it was. That was the first time in a while I genuinely laughed. Because karma? It doesn't miss. But it wasn't just Jenna who felt the heat. Damon Pierce, the man who thought he could outscam the system, finally slipped up. It came from the most unexpected place, an anonymous tip sent to Rachel's office. A screenshot of Damon's real name, Daniel Porter, a known fraudster wanted in 3 states under multiple aliases. His rap sheet? Money laundering, securities fraud, cyber identity theft. The man didn't just vanish. He ran. And the FBI? They were already looking for him. Rachel sent the tip to Agent Lawson, the federal investigator who'd quietly been watching the case unfold from the sidelines. Within a week, an arrest warrant was issued. Damon's face was plastered across federal databases and internal alerts. And you know what the cherry on top was? He used Jenna's passport application to try and leave the country. They both went down together, poetic, really. But while their world burned, mine started to grow. I moved into a new place, small, quiet, surrounded by trees and far from all the noise. Eli and Tyler came by on weekends to help repaint. We grilled burgers, drank beer, and laughed like I hadn't in years. The first morning I woke up in that house, I made coffee, sat on the deck, and realized I was at peace. No more second-guessing. No more sleeping next to a stranger. Just me, a dog I finally had time to adopt, and a long road ahead, but one that I chose. Then, something unexpected arrived. A letter. No return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper. Typed. No signature. He used me too. I believed him when he said you were dangerous. I believed him when he said you were cheating. I didn't know the full plan. I just wanted out. I'm sorry. I didn't need a name. Jenna. I didn't reply. Because closure doesn't always come with conversation. Sometimes, it comes when you finally stop caring whether someone understands what they did. Sometimes, it's enough just to survive the damage and walk away stronger. The divorce was finalized 2 months later. I kept the house, most of the assets, and the freedom I didn't realize I'd lost until I had it back. Jenna? Her court-mandated restitution was steep. Probation. Ongoing investigation. Damon? Last I heard, he was still awaiting trial in federal custody, with a whole new stack of fraud charges piled on top. People always ask me now, how did you stay calm? How did you win? And I always say the same thing. I didn't try to win. I just stopped playing their game and started living mine. The morning the divorce officially finalized, I didn't feel relief. I didn't throw a party or call friends or post anything dramatic. Instead, I got up early, brewed a strong cup of coffee, and took it out to the back porch of my new place. The air was cold, but clean. Quiet. Birds chirped softly in the trees beyond the yard, and my dog, Milo, a rescue mutt with a crooked tail and a personality bigger than my last marriage, stretched and yawned beside me. It wasn't peace I felt. It was wholeness. Like for the first time in years, I belonged to myself again. Looking back, it's hard to believe how far I'd fallen, not because of the betrayal, but because of how normal it all started to feel. Jenna didn't destroy me overnight. It was slow, subtle, quiet sacrifices disguised as compromise. Being told I was too sensitive when I asked questions. Feeling guilty for needing space. Working longer hours just to avoid arguments I never started. By the time she filed, I didn't recognize myself. But now I do. I spent the next few months rebuilding not just my life, but my sense of self. I went back to therapy. Not because I was broken, but because I wanted to stay unbroken. I reconnected with old friends I'd pushed away. Traveled to places Jenna always said were a waste of money. Started a side project with Eli and Tyler that might turn into a business. But more than that, I started living on my terms again. Eating what I wanted. Sleeping without anxiety. Saying no to people who didn't respect my time. And weirdly enough, learning how to be alone. Happily. One night, I stumbled across a photo from our wedding. I don't know why I kept it. In the picture, Jenna was smiling, that rehearsed, pageant winner smile she wore so well. And me? I looked happy, but not whole. That version of me? He didn't know what was coming. He didn't know about the lies, the fake shell companies, the offshore accounts, the gaslighting. He didn't know he was being turned into a pawn in a two-person con job wrapped in wedding vows. But he also didn't know he'd survive it, thrive after it. He didn't know that years later, he'd be sipping coffee with a loyal dog beside him, at peace, in a house no one could take. I didn't delete the photo. I just put it away. Because some ghosts don't deserve your attention, but they do remind you of how far you've come. I still get messages from strangers who heard the story through mutuals, forums, or the legal community. They ask how I didn't lose it, how I kept going, how I exposed her without losing myself. And I tell them, you don't win by being louder. You win by being better. You win by walking away with your soul intact. Now, when people mention Jenna or Damon, I don't flinch. I don't get angry. They're footnotes now, just messy names in a story I already finished reading. A story that started with betrayal, but ended with freedom. And that's the day I gave myself back my life. Thank you for following Nate's full circle journey, from betrayal and heartbreak to justice, healing, and self-worth.